For the baby size, you're going to need 4 strips in a dark shaded color, 4 strips in a medium, and 4 strips in 2 different light colors. I'm using white, which is also going to be used for the background fabric. For the background of this quilt without the border, you're going to need 3 of your background strips. I'm using white by the width of the fabric, 2.5 inches wide. This is a jelly strip, or you can cut 2.5 inch wide strips of fabric by the width of your fabric if you're using a 40 inch or 43 inch wide fabric. And we're going to need 6 pieces 2.5 inches wide by the width of the fabric for your sashing, which is going to run vertically and horizontally down your quilt. Now, before you start sewing, make sure that you have pressed your fabric and that each piece of your jelly roll or your yardage is nicely pressed. This really, makes such a difference to the final product. A lot of people don't like to press their fabric because it's that extra step, and it can take a good hour, but it makes a hell of a lot of difference in the long run. So you're going to have a dark, a medium, a light, and a light. If you are using white as your background color or a light as your background color, don't make the mistake of putting the same color on the outside of any of your blocks. So if you are using white, I'm using white as the background, so I'm going to always put that inside of my block so it doesn't disappear into the background. Now we're going to sew these 2 of 40-inch width of fabric, at least 40-inch width of fabric, to make your 8.5-inch sections, and we need 2 placed in this coordination and 2 in the alternative coordination, which we'll show you as we go along. So a good tip on how to sew this easily is, if you're going to sew one strip up, sew the next one down so that you get a nice even edging for your strips. Now we're going to iron to the dark side. Iron to the dark side. Press your strips, and now we're going to cut them up into 8.5-inch sections. Square your end. And now measure 8.5 inches. Measure 8.5 inches all the way across, and we're going to cut that with a rotary cutter. And so on. Once you have those strips cut into 8.5, we can work on the next load of strips, and that's going to be a light, a medium, a light, and a dark one, with your light sandwiched. If it is the same as the background, make sure it is sandwiched in between and that you don't put the light. That is the same color as the background at the end of your block, because it will disappear into your background. We're going to sew those together and come back and show you. Now we're going to cut 12 8.5 inch sections from a 2.5 inch wide jelly roll or yardage that you've cut into 2.5 inch strips. You need 3 by the width of the fabric if it's a 40 inch, at least a 40 inch width of fabric. And we're going to cut 12. I'm cutting 4 pieces together, 4 at a time. And you just want to cut those up. One very good tip is to always change your rotary cutter blade at the beginning of a new quilt. So we've got 8 blocks cut in one direction and 8 in the other direction. It's 16 blocks altogether. And now we're going to sew the 2.5 inch by 8.5 inch sashing to each block. We're going to position it according to the diagram, and we're going to sew the rows together. So it's 2 blocks from one pile and 2 from the other pile, and I've laid out according to the diagram, and we're going to sew the sashing between each block. Press your rows. And then you're going to block it with a ruler and a rotary cutter to straighten all your edges. So this block must measure 8.5 wide, 8.5 wide by 38.5 long. And that's what you're going to block it at. We're going to block it. And now we can sew the sashing. Once you have the rows constructed, you're going to cut 3 38 inch white sashing to go between the rows. And you need 3 of those. We're going to sew with a 38.5 inch sashing between our rows. What you need to watch for is when you attach the bottom rows to the top upper piece with the sashing, that your vertical sashing matches row to row. So in other words, you want to see that this section matches. You want to pin it in such a way that that section matches all along. Next step is to cut the borders for the bottom, and that's going to be 38.5 inches by 6 inches, and we're going to attach the border to the top and the bottom. We're going to attach the border to the top and the bottom. Once you've attached the border to the base and to the top, we are now going to sew the border on the side seam borders, and that is 49.5 inches.